Well, good evening. I'm George. My Facebook friends know that already. But for anyone viewing this that doesn't know me, hello. Um, Ran across this particular screen, had this computer about a year, just never had really paid any attention to it. Um, Started fooling around with it tonight and saw what it was and decided I wanted to ramble. So, I'm going to ramble. For those that know me know that I was raised in the Church of God. The Church of God in those years was extremely strict in their teachings. Really, the teachings probably haven't changed that much, but the way they viewed may have. My dad, Church of God preacher, probably the most devout Christian man I've ever known. He's my hero. He has shaped the views that I've had my whole life. Whatever I have amounted to, quite candidly, I owe to him. But there are others that have had an influence. And what I want to do tonight is to thank a particular gentleman. And I'm going to ramble a little bit, so that's okay. But he was actually my high school Bible teacher. I went to a Baptist school. I was raised Pentecostal. And his name is Arthur Bruton. Now, Mr. Bruton is still a friend of mine. He's on my Facebook page. Tremendous man of God. He's had a tremendous influence on hundreds of students. You look at his Facebook page, and I dare say, without having gone through them, that probably the vast majority of his friends are people that have sat under his teachings. Now, what Mr. Bruton, the influence that he had on me, being Pentecostal, going to a Baptist school, that we definitely had some theological differences on the way that we viewed certain scriptures. Mr. Bruton never hesitated to tell you his viewpoint, would make it very clear what it was. But he also never hesitated to listen to mine, to let me justify why I believed the way that I did on certain scriptures. That's not what really the influence was. What the influence was is a statement he made. There was an issue, not an issue, but a scripture that we were discussing, and the theological difference of that particular scripture between Pentecostals and Baptists. And he had told me that I had posed some questions that he was actually going to research. That the sign of a scholar was that they were constantly seeking the truth. Now, it didn't mean a whole lot. It really didn't click exactly what he was saying then. Later, it did. That as a scholar, you form opinions. But because you're constantly seeking the truth, that if something enlightens the viewpoint that you have, as a scholar, you have to accept that that is the truth, and what you know is your basic truth may change somewhat. And like I said, at the time it didn't mean a whole lot, but what has happened, the journey I've been on for the last 4 or 5 years, it has just been unreal compared to what I would have guessed in my younger life I would have ever faced. Being raised as strictly as I was in the church, I had a tendency to equate salvation and Christian living with maintaining the teachings of the Church of God. And quite candidly, it was a standard that I honestly didn't know that I could live up to. And it became a stumbling block for me. But as things in my journey has progressed, and I've done soul searching through the years, I've come to realize that Christianity should not be quite so judgmental. That we have a tendency, if you don't believe just like I believe, then, you're wrong and God help you. And that's wrong. That's not what the scripture, there's obviously certain things in the scripture that are right and wrong. And no matter what your religion, those are standards that should be accepted as a Christian. But a lot of the other is superficial. And what comes to mind, I remember talking to a gentleman one day, and he's sitting there in the backyard, and he's drinking a beer, talking about God and what God has done in his life and where he had brought him from. And I'm sitting there discounting somewhat on what he's talking about simply because he's drinking a beer. We're raised in the Church of God. You didn't drink anything. Scriptures don't necessarily teach that. The scriptures teach us that we should not be drunk. Scriptures about, drink a little wine for the stomach's sake or whatever actually would indicate there are times that you're better off drinking than you are drinking the water even. But anyway, that somewhat irrelevant. The thing was, I diminished the work that God had in his life simply because of something that was superficial. And I've come to realize that, the Bible teaches us, and I'd heard it before, but never never really sunk in that we work out our own salvation with fear and trembling before God, which in essence means that there are some things that would be temptations for me that could cause me to stray and lose the path that I need to be on. Quite candidly, there's some things I could do that might be a stumbling block for you in your life. So there is a balance to be maintained. But just because, someone does something that we can't do doesn't necessarily mean they're not going to go to heaven. I think there's going to be a lot more people in heaven than maybe some of the church people would think we're going to be there. Little things come to mind. I went to had a friend of mine that was a little turned off to the church, and the only church they would go to with me was if we went to a non-denominational church. I'd never been to one, but I went. Walked in, and the first thought that went through my mind is, these people don't dress like they don't have their Sunday go to meeting clothes on. They were dressed in t-shirts and blue jeans. Some of them had shorts on, tennis shoes. And, I was a little bit taken back by that. I was talking to, it's either the pastor or associate pastor, I don't even remember now, after the service, asked me what I thought. And I told him just that I was a little bit surprised at what they were wearing. But this particular church had tremendous outreach ministries, and one of them was with the homeless. And he looked at me and he said, "Can you look at this congregation and tell me who's homeless?" And I looked, and the people were walking around, milling around. This was after service. And I told him, no, I can't. I can't look at and say, well, they're homeless. Their homeless ministry, the church was big enough, they had showers, and the men could shave, and they had clothes for the whole families that were there. He said, you cannot look at this congregation and tell me who doesn't have a car, who may work at a law firm or some executive management position. You could have a homeless person who has absolutely nothing standing beside him, an executive of a major company that's making $150,000 to $200,000 a year, and they're both able to come into this church and worship without feeling any intimidation from anybody that they don't fit in, be it upper or lower. Because quite often I think we're too judgmental, even on people that make too much money, if there is such a thing as making too much money. But his point was well taken. It's no longer an issue with me. God doesn't look at what we're wearing. He looks at how we live. And all of this has come into play to where now I can accept Christianity based on biblical standards without discounting church teaching. I'm not saying that they're wrong or they're bad, but they're also not the standard that God set. They're the standard that man set. And can accept the fact that Mr. Bruton's not Church of God. He's still a Baptist, but he is a saint. His life is tremendous, more influence for the good than I could possibly have. And I appreciate him. I appreciate the influence that he had in my life. I appreciate that even all these years later, that something that was said to me in passing by him has helped me to get to the point that I am now. That I can accept the fact that I can be a little different maybe than mainstream, but yet I can still live right. I can still go to heaven simply by following the principles of God laid out in the scriptures. So, Mr. Bruton, I want to thank you. I think that so often we wait till someone is no longer with us to appreciate their life. And I would like to tell you that I appreciate your life while you can still hear it. So, all my Facebook friends, I appreciate it. And we'll talk to you later. Good night.